Welcome. The City of Pittsburgh's Black History Month honors the spirit and contributions of the Vashon family. We're highlighting the enduring legacy of abolitionists and activists of the 1800s. The impact continues to motivate contemporary movements for justice and equality. Underscoring the quest for human rights remains an ongoing journey through education, advocacy, and activism. That's why we're here with Dr. Allyce Pinchback Johnson of Black Women for a Better Education. So we can look at the history and examine the impact that it has on present-day contemporaries and look at who carries the torch today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Dr. Allyce Pinchback Johnson. I am a co-founder and also the executive director of Black Women for a Better Education. I'm a Pittsburgh native, born and raised here in the city, graduate of Pittsburgh Public Schools, also a former employee. I spent 5 years in the professional development department at Pittsburgh Public Schools, and the daughter of a retired PPS educator. So education, justice, and public schools are something that's been at the forefront of my life for quite a while. Also a mother. I have a child that's currently a kindergartner in Pittsburgh Public Schools as well. That's great.
So what inspired your involvement with Black Women for a Better Education?
So we started in 2020 during the pandemic, and this was around the time where we were unclear about how long the pandemic would be, and it was that March 2020 when it was like, hey, okay, students, we have to be off for 2 weeks, and we'll see what happens. And what we saw very quickly is that Pittsburgh Public Schools, unfortunately, wasn't able to continue education for students in meaningful ways. And so when we looked at some of our counterparts in the county, they may be, schools said, okay, on March 13th, we're going to close schools. And then that Monday after, they were able to get onto their devices and have virtual learning. Unfortunately, in the district, there was not one-to-one access to electronic devices, and so students weren't getting what they needed. Not only students being able to access virtual learning, but also there were concerns about students with IEPs getting the accommodations and support that they needed. So there were a group of Black women in the community who were just having some conversations via text message like, hey, what can we do? How can we support our own children? How can we support the children that we serve? Some of us are community leaders or part of out-of-school time and nonprofit organizations. And we also had some questions for the district, and we started asking those questions at forums and town halls that the district was hosting virtually. We're like, okay, what's the plan? How quickly can we get access to computers for our students? What are we going to do to ensure that we are not violating students' rights, students with IEPs? And we didn't feel like we were getting good responses to those questions. And so we went to our school board and said, hey, might be time for a change. And we asked for our school board not to renew the contract of our previous superintendent, and they decided not to listen to us. And so, because our school board is a democratically elected body, we decided to start a political action committee and to run slates of school board candidates that we felt would better meet the needs of our students and families. And so that has become work that we've done during every election cycle. And so we have run school board candidates in 3 election cycles. And currently have 7 people on school board that we've endorsed for that role. In addition to that, we're also doing work around building awareness and capacity of our people in our region to understand key educational issues, and we do that through a number of programs.
That's awesome. I specifically wondered about the organic. It sounds like it happened organically, but the women that you include in the Black Women for Better Education, what inspired that, and specifically why is the focus for women?
And I think it was really just our network. So when I think about folks in my life who are passionate about education, who are passionate about children, a lot of folks in my immediate circle are women. And so again, this started really with just organic conversations, just a group text message between a few of us like, hey, what's happening on your end? What's happening specifically with your kids? What's happening with the students and families you serve in your professional life? And when we decided to move forward with writing the letter to our school board about the discontent with the previous superintendent, we had asked Black women to sign the letter, and we were able to mobilize 55 Black women to do so. So it really wasn't that it was exclusion. It was just really about the folks that were kind of on the ground and really thoughtful about what's happening. And when we think about it, a lot of us are mothers and caregivers, and so we are those folks that are really focused on what's happening with our children. And so it's really not a surprise or a secret that it's the case. It also, I think, speaks to the legacy of Black women who have been involved in education, justice, and advocacy work in our city. And so when we think about Margaret Malyans, or we think about Dr. Barbara Sizemore, or we think about Miss Wanda Henderson, folks that have been fighting or did fight for educational justice for decades. I think it's really just an extension of that womanhood and motherhood and that caregiving spirit that we carry into the education justice work.
Curious about the challenges that you faced and what challenges Black children in Pittsburgh Public Schools have faced that you've helped to address?
Yeah, so it's not super popular to go to your school district or your school board and ask them to get rid of a sitting superintendent. That's not a popular stance to take. And so, as you can imagine, there was a lot of pushback with us doing that. And flat out resistance. Not only did the school board decide not to follow, our advice around that, they did it in record time. And so per state law in Pennsylvania, when a superintendent's contract is coming to an end, you have about a 6-month window to let them know whether or not you want to move forward with a renewal. And so that window would have put our superintendent in about February of 2021, where they would have had to let him know if they were going to renew the contract. When we started our efforts in June of 2020, the board decided to move forward in August of 2020 to renew the contract. And so they did it in record time. And in a way that felt like they weren't listening to us or valuing the things that were being said. And, it was the 55 Black women that signed the letter. There were educators within the district that had expressed concerns, and there was one that had started a petition that got thousands of signatures. There were folks that were going to public hearings and asking for the district and for the board to just be a little bit more thoughtful about the process and how we move forward. And unfortunately, that just wasn't happening. And so that's what really led to us saying, hey, we're going to run a slate of candidates. That also came along with a set of challenges. So first, understanding how to get involved and engaged in a political process to start a political action committee. That was kind of a fly-by-night thing that we had to learn. Also being able to support a slate of 5 candidates. And so how do you help them to get campaign managers or to think about their platform or to have a plan for canvassing? So, we really had to kind of learn all of those things as we were going along. And of course, when you go up against folks who are incumbents and who have maybe been in their seats for 1 or 2 terms, of course, that doesn't fly well at all either. And so, we were able to overcome and be successful and to do it in spite of, the resistance that we were facing. And again, I think when we think about, Black women, especially in the education justice space in Pittsburgh, we see that. So when we look at the advocates for African American students who sued the district in 1992 due to their inability to educate Black kids at high levels, we saw that same resistance. Those folks were ostracized. They were looked at, what, do you have the audacity as a Black parent to come up against the school district and to file a lawsuit? Their students faced retaliation in classrooms. They faced retaliation as parents in the district. And literally for 14 years, there was no movement. There were law firms that wouldn't even represent them because they didn't want the hit to their reputation for taking the side over Black parents over the school district. And so a lot of times this work it happens and is done in spite of kind of what the system or the powers that be are saying.
It's interesting to me that we're talking about 1992, we're talking about 2026, and when we go back to the 1800s, we're facing these same challenges. So, You know, we always hear, and everybody always says, history repeats itself. What are we learning today, and where are we going in the future? Where is Black Women for a Better Education going in the future?
So I guess to think about this within historical context, so we have a school district that's almost 200 years old. Pittsburgh Public Schools was founded in 1835. And at the time, I think there were maybe 12 schools that they had, and I think one of them was a school for Black students. Of course, we're talking about times of segregation, and that school was in such terrible condition that they had to be put under central control. And so this is not new in terms of the way in which Black students are educated or miseducated or not given the resources and support that they need. It was 100 years into Pittsburgh Public Schools history until there were Black teachers and Black school leaders. And so when we think about even questions or conversations around representation for students and seeing themselves in the curriculum or seeing themselves in the folks that educate them or lead their schools, there's a history of that as well. When schools are not resourced properly or there's disparities in what one school gets versus another, we know that directly impacts student achievement. When we look at student achievement in Pittsburgh Public Schools, we can literally look across any domain, whether it be academics or student suspension and expulsion, access to gifted and talented courses, and we are going to see disparities for Black children. We are going to see disparities for students of color. We are going to see the disparities for students who have IEPs. And of course, we know Black students sit at the intersection of all of those identities. And so these are the same things that we've been fighting for. These are the same things that the advocates, even in the work that they've been doing. So in the 1970s, Dr. Sizemore, as a scholar and former superintendent of a school district in Chicago, I believe, maybe it's DC, I'll have to check that. She came to the district and said, hey, I'd like to elevate some research around high achieving Black schools in Pittsburgh Public Schools, because despite everything that was happening, despite the racism and systemic oppression that was happening in our city and in our country, in the 1970s, Pittsburgh Public Schools had high achieving Black schools, predominantly Black schools. And she wanted to highlight why that was happening. What were the culture and the conditions in those schools that were leading to students being successful? And she met resistance from the superintendent, because his thought was, well, if we elevate these things, then it must mean that the other teachers aren't working hard enough, and we don't want them to feel bad about what they're trying to do. And her thought is, it's not about whether or not they're working hard. It's about how do we work in ways that are strategic on behalf of Black students. And so Dr. Sizemore was savvy enough to understand that also in the late 1970s, Pennsylvania was moving from appointed school boards to elected school boards. And at the time, her husband, Jake Mallions, was on the school board. And so through some savvy political organizing, they were able to flip the school board, and they were able to then get a superintendent that was focused on student achievement. And so Pittsburgh had what was considered an enlightened era under Dr. Richard Wallace, who was there between 1980 and 1992 and was able to move the district along. And he did that in a few ways. He did that through some of the programming and initiatives that he brought along, but also through allowing some of the strong and successful Black leaders that were getting results and achievement for Black students to be able to do that work as well. And so as we think about where we are as a district, where we are as an education system and what's happening, there are things that we can learn from Dr. Wallace's tenure. There are things we can learn from Dr. Sizemore's political and education advocacy as we think about what the future of Pittsburgh Public Schools may hold.
Great. And just going back to the past, I want to share that the legacy of the Vashons, collaborating with Reverend Lewis Woodson and John B. Vashon, the father figure of the family, they started the African Education Society and the first public school for Black children in Pittsburgh. So, it's this conversation is related directly to that history and all that you're sharing with us today. Such an expert in this area. So one of the last questions I have is, how do you help dismantle the systems of racism, oppression, and discrimination in our schools, and how do you measure that kind of success?
Well, the theory of change that Black Women for a Better Education is operating with right now is around representation. And so our thought is, if you have highly qualified and Black student-centered school board members who are representing the interests of Black students and families, they have some major roles, and every school board member has these responsibilities. They are supposed to be stewards over our tax dollars. So how is our money being spent to educate our students? What decisions are they making about how that money is spent? What decisions are they making around policy? Though that's a major role of a school board member. We want the school board members that we have now to be accountable for their role in hiring, firing, evaluating the superintendent. It's important that they are looking at the connections between the superintendent and the work that they're doing. Is it moving the needle for Black students? Are we resourcing our schools in ways that are going to address some of these ongoing issues? And it's their responsibility to be asking the superintendent those questions, to be questioning the folks that are on their team, to be able to do that work as well. And so, that's a piece of it. But also, to your point about the history of the Vashon family and of Black people in this region, we also understand that the responsibility for educating our kids doesn't lie solely with the school district. We, of course, are the first educators of our students, and so we take responsibility for what that might look like. And, as much as we want to work alongside our school district and we want them to be successful, we also understand that if they're not able to educate our kids at high levels, then we may need to think about alternatives. And so, we kind of operate on this parallel track of, hey, let's do what we need to do to think about how to improve our school district, while at the same time thinking about what high quality alternatives may look like for Black students. And so we have interest and thought there. And, that has been a point of criticism for us. We've been referred to as the quote charter pack. Oh, you want to see all the schools become charters. Well, no, that's not the case. We want students to be educated in places where they are going to have the most success. We want that to be our local school district, but it hasn't been. When we look across history, most of the time when we see Black students' success, it is unfortunately an anomaly instead of the norm. When I think about my own experience in Pittsburgh Public Schools, I had an amazing experience, but I learned very quickly, especially when I went to work for the district, that was an exception, and that there was intentionality around perhaps the things that my mom was doing as an educator to navigate the system. Of course, the coding of being, quote, gifted and the amenities that come along with that other students aren't able to experience. And so, how do we ensure that regardless of where a student comes from and what school they end up in our district, that they are receiving a high quality education? And again, if it's not working for them, then what are those alternatives that they may need to explore as well? And so, we're kind of thinking about it in those ways.
What can collaborators and partners and parents and supporters do to help Black Women for a Better Education and all of our public education system?
I think a few things. I would say for all of those role groups broadly, really hone in and focus in on education and on the school board. I think that, education becomes a very personal conversation for folks, especially folks that have kids or are caregivers or connected to students in some ways, and that's important, but we all should be thinking about education. We all should be focused on our school board and what our school board is up to. Our school district has a larger budget than the entire city of Pittsburgh, and we have a 9-member democratically elected board. So you have 9 people who are making decisions about how a lot of money is spent on behalf of our kids. Do you know who your school board member is? Do you know how to reach them? We encourage folks, go to the district website, Find out who your school board member is. Reach out and introduce yourself to that person. Their email address will be there. There's also the public hearing. That's an opportunity each month for you to go and spend 3 minutes testifying about things that are on your mind, whether it's in support of something that they might be voting on in that month, or maybe you're not supportive of it, but regardless of your stance, making sure your voice is heard around that. With parents, really being involved in your school, whether it's PTO or PSCC, and we know sometimes there's barriers to being a part of those groups, but making sure that your presence is felt in your students' classroom, at your school in general, at central office, making sure that you have the opportunity to do that. And we actually try to support parents with that work through our Learning Institute. And so our Learning Institute is what we consider to be our training ground. So we're bringing together caregivers and parents and concerned community members who want to learn more about the public education system, and helping them to think about what are some of the issues that are facing the kids that you have or the kids that you serve, and how might we help to support some type of change idea or way in which you can improve the system. And so that's a 8-week training that we do for families and caregivers to think about ways to impact the system. And then what we've seen, we're running our third cohort. There are folks in those cohorts who have gone on to run for school board. And so if you have the desire to run for school board, it's a good springboard to get that training and support that you need for that as well.
Well, thank you so much. This conversation could go on for days, and I know there's a lot of work to be done. So thank you for being here. Thank you to Black Women for Better Education. For stepping up and being the model of a system that we need in place.
Thank you.